Hello.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. So, welcome back to What's the Tea with ACP, where we bring in artists and we talk to them about things happening in their lives, what they think about the arts, and also current events. Our format has changed just a smidge. We were focusing on pride and pride related topics. With the LGBTQIA community, but we thought that it would be great to just open up our talking space and bring in people, just all people, right? So keeping everything inclusive, because one of the things we talk about is inclusivity. So we just wanted to give you an update on kind of how the format will be from now on. So that we are still focusing though on artists and kind of what they're wanting to see in the arts, what they're expecting in the arts, the projects that they're working on, and just amplifying the voices of artists in our community and outside of our community. You go, Michael. You start introducing if you're ready.
Yeah. This week we're talking about uh, ability. I think when we were talking about what sort of topic we wanted to focus on this week, um, something I was thinking about was adaptability. But the root of that word is ability, the ability to adapt. And I think in this time during a pandemic, we've learned a lot about our abilities, um, and maybe we've
Yeah.
fostered some new ones, uh, and maybe we are unable to do some of the things that we are trained to do or want to do. So I think it's a perfect topic.
Definitely.
And today we have three guests, and each one of them is an amazing artist and has a lot to bring to this table. And they're all directors.
Yes.
And I'm going to go ahead and introduce them by reading their bios and telling you a little bit about them. So, our first guest, Mary Birnbaum, uh, her new production of La Boheme made her the third woman in the history of the Santa Fe Opera to direct the season opener. Yeah. Mary, whose stage direction of opera and theater New York Times critic Anthony Tomasini called viscerally overwhelming and genuinely insightful, vibrant. She works both internationally from Taiwan to Central America, Australia and Israel, and across the US. This summer, her production of Dido and Aeneas played Opera Holland Park in London and Opera de Versailles. In Opera Magazine, George Loomis wrote that Mary Birnbaum's thoughtful direction of Eugene Onegin at Juilliard was rich with imaginative touches, and the Houston Press termed her Hansel and Gretel a stunner, perhaps the company's most perfect realization. Wow, that's amazing. The company has found a director of real quality in Mary Birnbaum. Currently Associate Director of the Postgraduate Artist Diploma in Opera Studies program at Juilliard, Mary has taught acting for singers at Bard College, oh, that's right down the road, and in the Lindemann Young Artist program at the Metropolitan Opera. A graduate of Harvard College, Mary trained professionally in physical theater at L'École Jacques Lecoq in Paris. Welcome, Mary Birnbaum.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Hi, Michael. Hi, Elliot. Thanks for
Hi,
having me.
Mary.
Hi.
So excited.
Thank you for joining. We
We're
look
so happy
forward
to
to
have you.
chatting.
Truly so much fun.
Yes, yes, yes.
Our next guest, you may recognize her from a few What's the Teas ago, is Pascale Florestal. She is a director, educator, dramaturg, and collaborator based in Boston, Massachusetts. Her recent directing credits include Back the Night by Melinda Lopez at Boston College, We Are Proud to Present by Jackie Sibley's Drury at Brandeis University, Mary and Rosetta by George Brandt at Greater Boston Stage Company, Code Listen by Sha Pong Liu at the Millennium Stage of the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center, Shrek the Musical at the Greater Boston Stage Company, and an Education in Prudence at the Open Theater Project.
Fierce.
Pascale has directed several stage readings of new plays by Michael Hisamoto, Marcus Gardley, Obehi Janice, Phaedra Michelle Scott, Lynn Brandon, Aaron Lurch, and Greg Lamb. As an assistant to the director, she has worked with Kimberly Sr., Liesl Tommy, Billy Porter, Paul Daniel, and M. Bevan O'Gara. Pascale is also a dramaturg recently working on Passover by Antoinette Nwandu with Speakeasy Stage, co-produced with the Front Porch Arts Collective. She also serves as the education director for Front Porch Arts Collective, where she created the Summer Reading Series and the Young Critics Program, an educational program that strives to foster and incubate the next generation of arts critics. She currently works as the Arts Emergency Preparedness Coordinator with the City of Boston's Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. Come on, Pascale.
Yes, honey.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hey everyone, so good to see you all again.
So good to see you
So
too.
happy to have you.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
And our final guest is Ellen Jackson. Ellen Jackson is a director of opera and chamber music based in the US. She has worked with such companies as the Glimmerglass Festival, the Atlanta Opera, Arizona Opera, Opera Delaware, Westminster Opera Theater, and Opera Ithaca. Directing highlights include a new production of American opera for Westminster Opera Theater, including A Flourish of Green, A Vow, Service Provider, and Trouble in Tahiti. Make a Scene for Opera Delaware, a devised game show featuring excerpts from the inherited repertoire, Opera Delaware's Young Artists, and a participatory audience. A new production of Tosca for Opera Ithaca and Metropolis Opera Project with performances in Ithaca and New York City, and a new production of Kristen Hefner and Royce Vavrick's opera Electronica Bully Pulpit, presented as installation at the Cherry Art Space in Ithaca, New York.
Yes.
Assistant directing highlights include the world premiere of Blue, Silent Night at the Glimmerglass Festival, Salome and Porgy and Bess at the Atlanta Opera, Tosca at Opera San Antonio, Charlie Parker's Yardbird at Arizona Opera, and Thumbprint and Song from the Uproar at Opera Ithaca. In the 2019-2020 season, Ellen was a studio artist at the Atlanta Opera. Ellen is represented by Stratagem Artists. Please welcome Ellen Jackson.
Hi, thank you. Thanks
Hello,
for having me. Hi,
Thank you for being here.
I'm excited.
Yes, yes.
So we wanted to start off this discussion, as we do most of our talks, with a definition of our tea of the day. So,
Yes.
Elliot, I know you always give us the definition. So
Oh,
why don't you?
yes, it brings me joy. So, time to define the tea. So, today we are discussing, well, we're not discussing specifically, but the word ability will be threaded kind of throughout our conversation. So, Merriam-Webster defines ability as the quality or state of being able, the ability of, or for example, the ability of the soil to hold water. It also means especially physically, mental, or legal power to do something. So, a writer's ability to engage the reader's interest. It also includes competence in doing something or skill, and the natural aptitude or acquired proficiency. So, it kind of encompasses a lot of different areas, specifically the state of being able. So, to be able to do something is ability. So that's the tea for today.
Awesome.
So I was talking about, we've kind of been forced to look at our abilities and lean into some more as we've been shut up in our houses and cut off from in-person connection. And still the thing that strikes me the most is adaptability and being adaptable. So I wanted to ask you all, what are some changes that you have had to make in your personal lives since COVID has hit?
I mean, a major change has been not being on the road and being home, which has been, I think, a very positive result of the pandemic. While hundreds of thousands of people died, but that's like, if there's a silver lining. But, with that comes, of course, personally, I think for many artists, and Mary and Pascale, maybe you feel this way too, like our identities are so caught up in the work that we do. And so I think one of the adaptations I've had to make is this kind of recalibration of self and like, who am I if I'm not in the rehearsal room, and like what, and it's been both difficult and totally enlightening and useful.
I think that's really well said, Ellen. I think those two things are huge, and they've been sort of anchors of this time in a really fantastic way. Finding yourself, refinding yourself, and sort of greeting yourself. Sitting across the table from yourself, there's this beautiful poem, I think, "Love Before Love," that I was anyway back to. I think also. I think re-embracing the beginner's mind that let us all become artists in the first place, and sort of the sense of the question mark that can guide you in your work, but rarely does when it's a grind. That to me has been a personal change that also has manifested in creative projects. Yeah,
I think, it's funny for us, as I think in the art that we do is all about bringing people together. We call it, like, I love hearing this, like the gathering economy. Like, I never would have thought of what my work is the gathering economy. But as a director, my job is to create dialogue with audiences and actors and designers. And like, that's what we do. And then, so you take that away. So then again, what are we, how do we hold up our work in this time? I think that's been a big question I've been rattling myself with. And I think, what's also interesting this time to have, right? I like right before the pandemic hit, I knew that I was going to be booked until at least August without a break. And I think we're all like, oh, I can't wait to have a break. It's so exciting. And then the break happens, and then we're like ready to get back to work. But we're in this moment of like, the work cannot really go in the same way that we are used to. So what does that mean? And I think there's also this other side of the difficulty of creating work. I'm still I'm still asked to create work, but it's different now. It's not the same. So in that sense, like, how am I trying to adapt to this time? I think I've been very apprehensive to figure out, like, how do you fully embrace the virtual world that we're trying to create within. And I think it's hard. And I remember starting the pandemic, and my wife and I had like these giant Post-its all over our wall. Like, we're going to do this. I'm going to write this play. I'm going to read all of this. And it's July. And I think we maybe did like 2 out of 10 of those. There were some projects she definitely did and I didn't do. But I think like that idea of like, even though we have this time to create, there is, this pandemic is real. Like, this trauma that we are going through is so real. And it really is giving us all an opportunity, I think, to like pause and reflect and think about, how have we been creating and working together? What is wrong with that system and how it's working? And how can we take this time now to be like, okay, clearly the overworking that we've all been doing hasn't been sustainable. And even the work itself can't be sustained now. So what do? How can we, change the way we do things? That's where I've been in this last like month, I think, or 2 months, who knows what is time. But yeah, I think that's like where I've been trying to like adapt and be able to move in this world right now.
I think to your point, Pascale, like, the people spend their entire lives learning how to work in the digital space, and suddenly everybody who works in theater is just like, we're supposed to be magically film directors right away and know how to, which is why it's so impressive, Elliot and Michael, that you have this forum that's set up. Like, I'm looking at this screen right now, and I think my like older millennial brain is like exploding because there's like a backstage, there's a chat, there's like
Yes, the
there's,
backstage really gets me. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
the wings.
like, design. Yeah, the whole thing is just like, it's very touching and amazing to see how people have adapted.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love it.
That said,
Yeah.
I think like while we are adapting, I think one of the questions that's coming up for me is like, should we adapt? Like, should the theater change in order to serve a digital platform and exist in the digital sphere? Or like, is it better for us, as you were saying, Mary, to kind of explore these like other creative impulses in this kind of interim time? I don't feel like I have the answer to that, but it's something that I've definitely been grappling with.
I loved the there's this, I don't know if your cities or you get New York's like theater consortium did a survey. One of the questions on the survey, it was basically about when do you feel comfortable being in a theater again? And as I was filling it out, I was like, oh my God, never, but hopefully. And one of the questions was like, when you buy a ticket to a performance, do you expect that you will also be able to just stay home and view it online as well as the performance? And I think that expectation of our audiences is going to actually, I think that's going to be real. I mean,
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
it's just wild. It's just a very different.
And like, yeah. Because I think the way you direct then has to change ultimately.
Yes.
Objectives are different.
How do you guys think? How do you think that, or what are the ways in which you've noticed that it has to? I agree.
I think even in just the way that theater is accessible in general, right? Like there are certain people who can't even access theater, not just geographically because of the physical limitations of theater spaces, maybe they're hard of hearing, there's so many things that in and of itself, that what we do already is accessible to a group of people that I think we have made strides to make theater a little bit more, but there's still so much work.
Yeah.
And I think in that vein, I think that means that because we've left this out for so long, left this part of the community out for so long of the conversation of how they can engage, now we're at a point we all can't engage. So what does that mean? And, I think my big like research is like, how do we support those artists? And because it's how we have to support ourselves. And I don't know, I think Ellen, you bring such a great point of like, is like the way that we do how we've been doing theater wrong and how we move through it is, I think about that every day. And I think so many people are trying to figure that out now. Like, do we move to just radio plays? There are companies that have completely canceled their seasons and are only doing radio plays, or they're streaming, or they're trying to, or like Barrington Stage is made their whole season more like one person plays or very small condensed cast members. So it's less ability for transmission, all of these things that we have to like rethink. And it's like, and I'm not a film director. So even the Zoom thing too, like, it's a whole other world. And I think it's a lot of how we have to like really critically think about what this art is and our goal for it. I think that's what I try to think about sometimes. And a part of me is like, maybe it means that there are certain aspects of theater that have to be on pause for a bit. I don't know. Or the people who are extremely excited about finding a new way. Like I saw an article in the LA Times about virtual reality theater. And I was like, I don't know if that's something I would direct. Maybe I would be an audience member, but I don't know. I don't know.
I want to try it so badly.
Right?
Like, I'd buy that ticket, but I wouldn't sign that contract.
That's a lot of responsibility. Not me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also in turn, like the thing about the theater, sometimes, not always, is the energy that an ensemble produces on stage together, which then like transverses the stage into the audience, and there's this like binding thing. Yeah. And so if you're making for film, I think it's different, or for like stage film, kind of like a la Met in HD, it's a different, what you're like, the emotional response that you're hoping to elicit through your actors is different than it is when you have a large group of people on stage. And so I don't know, maybe maybe in that regard, we have to become film directors from an artistic perspective, whether or not from a technical perspective. Again, I don't have the answer to that, but that's a question.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because in a way it's cracked open the like theatrical egg Like you have, you know, the yolk and the egg whites, and now we have to like scramble it together to make like an omelet, you know, and throw all these other little pieces in. I love an analogy. So throw all these throw all these other little pieces in and kind of like create something new, right? Or take the pieces apart and create two things that merge together. Maybe that's even better way of looking at it. But I think what Pascal touched upon with accessibility, like I think that this is going to bring a gateway open to so many more people who don't have, you know, accessibility to see live art or see specific people. Like I know for me, for my family, they're always like, well, when are you going to do something, you know, close to home? Or when are you going to, I really want to see you. I want to support you.
Virginia Opera.
Well, they're there. I didn't work with them. But
Damn.
the materials have been
What's the tea, right? Come on.
what I mean, what can you do? But yeah, so I always am like, I'm sorry. They're like, is it streaming? Is something, you know, and I'm always trying to like, you know, find my way to figure out how to get a clip from a company and be like, hey, I would really love to just show, you know, my family what I'm doing. And even that is difficult. And I think that now those kind of restrictions will start to lighten up just a little bit. And we're gonna have to start thinking about like new policies as well, right? So like monetary policies, spatial policies, just in all different aspects. There's so many different parts that go into creating that space. So it's going to be very interesting to see what companies and directors and I mean you all come up with within this time, and art, I mean, and the singers or the actors, you know, we all have to kind of dig in a little bit deeper than I think we were doing before to really convey what we want to an audience that, well, we can't see.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I think that's the thing for me that I like. How do you do that? How do you bring the audience? I think that's what we do different that film and TV. Though, you know, I think of the time of the sitcom where there's a live studio audience, but that no longer exists anymore technically. But that like element of the audience, that's like the final piece. I think for all of us as artists in this, right? So what is that? How do we create and engage when we don't? And then I think, you know, of film directors, like they do it all the time. So obviously it's not a difficult task, but I think that's what separate us from them. It's like we are different that way. But I also think a lot about, you know, I've always had a desire for film and TV because it is a different realm of accessibility that we just haven't been able to crack yet. And I think so much of what we're seeing now, even in TV and film, is a lot of playwrights and a lot of theater people actually transitioning there. I think, you know, maybe it's more of something that we all have to like start being okay with as an option, or at least a part of us to look into and consider as a possibility instead of just like it's one or the other.
Right.
I think, Elliot, also to your point, the Met education program this summer, which is a like weekly, they focus on a different opera every week. And a friend of mine is teaching one of the classes. He's a public school teacher, and he's teaching a Romeo and Juliet Gounod class. And over 3,000 kids from all over the world signed up.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Whoa.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can harness this energy through the accessibility question and figure out how to make our art shareable, which is it's worthy of that. And I think actually what companies are finding out is they should have been doing this 20 years ago. Like they should have been letting their artists publicize with like, I mean, I haven't been able to get any clips from any company either, Elliot. And it's like, at what point when your body is in the pieces or when you're totally creating the ideas from the outside, at what point is it our art and not their art? And how can you share that with in no way does, I think you guys are all, I think, younger than me, but who knows? I don't know. Where my generation downwards, I think, understands that the sharing is an inherent part of the art making, and that in no way will sharing prohibit people from buying anything that is actually like at the end of that rainbow.
Right.
I think people who are running companies haven't understood that until just now, that the monetizing of the sharing is a possibility, even if they are more generous with the rights to begin with. So
Totally agree.
I hope that people get wise, because we really need these. I mean, it's what we spend our lives doing. We don't do it for the money, we're doing it for the actual like proof of the tangible proof, which is ephemeral, obviously.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I would imagine that might affect the way that companies are drawing up their CBAs with orchestras in particular, but other unions, in order to kind of, in opera especially, to have this, to have the opportunity to be able to share. Because right now, I think in particular, everyone is so hamstrung by not being able to publish their orchestra and performance.
But I think they blame it on, this is a total
totally.
The orchestras are actually to blame.
Yeah, I've been learning a lot of things lately.
I'm sure
about those kind of things, especially with specific companies and their policies with the orchestra members. And I found that most of the this is just tea. I found that it really has a lot to do with the company's issues over the orchestral issues. At least now in 2020. Or at least in this time period within 2020, it's been a lot of pushback from companies specifically, just kind of, I guess maybe they want to be able to have those reins a little bit tighter. And it's
the opera industry. That doesn't sound like them.
I mean, it's the same thing with photographers, like when they're not well paid, and so the artists have to pay for their own photos. I don't know, Pascale, you run across that as when I work in theater, I run across it less, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's different in theater because most of the time there's a photographer on staff or like someone that they use, and that's a part of the contract normally, I believe, or at least in the contracts I try to look over all the time. But I have heard of that issue before for sure.
Yeah, you have to pay a fee to use the photos. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been an issue for quite some time. But I want to get into some of the questions. So one of the things that we did was we asked our guests to create a question, something for the other directors, and I guess also for us co-hosts to chime in on about just what they feel is a question to be asked right now within the art form. So, Mary, is it okay if we start with you? I'm gonna post your question on the thing, so you'll see it in just a moment. But
freaking out already in anticipation.
All right, here we go. So, Mary, you go ahead and read it. You read it.
All right. So everybody on this call, what will you do differently in a rehearsal room due to COVID and BLM? And BLM as just a movement towards acknowledging our Black and BIPOC colleagues and the way it's changed our perspective of what's normal in a room, I guess, when you get to create with others again.
Pascale, you want to go first?
Oh, I get.
Also,
so many, yeah. All the
this
things.
question is specifically, I want to, because there's a similar question coming up, but this is within the rehearsal room.
Right.
Okay.
Which I love and I miss. I think in terms of COVID, these are the things we don't think about enough, and I would love for there to be more information within policies of every theater, what the cleaning procedures are, so that we know that things are being cleaned constantly, especially props. And I guess I would even talk more with my stage manager about how every single surface is being handled. I remember when we first were afraid of this, I was in a rehearsal room and we had some hand sanitizer, and then the next week it was hand sanitizer everywhere, Clorox wipes everywhere, and it gradually got bad. But I think that's one thing I would be even more cautious of looking over and making sure with my team and and the company I'm working with, that there is some kind of hygiene or cleaning procedure that happens frequently enough that there can be no contamination. And hopefully there's a vaccine. Definitely a vaccine. Everyone needs to have the vaccine. Sorry. So if people don't like that, I think everyone should be who's in the room, because that contact is so difficult. Like, I try to think about the amount of times I like have to touch actors to move them, or asking them if I can touch them to move, and like getting them to do different things with each other. So making sure people are healthy and safe. And in terms of, equity and diversity, I think I try to do this work already, but I think one thing that I am afraid of when I work with other companies is having the ability to advocate for a team that is at least 50% diverse. And sometimes this happens, especially when I work with colleges and universities. I don't know if you all have experienced this, but they have a team already on faculty. So you don't really get to pick your designers. And most of the time, the faculty is all white. And so one thing I really want to be more mindful of and speak up to more is making sure my team is 50% of color and has a 50% representation of female and or non-binary artists. And I think that's in casting too, and making sure that the room represents the community that we are looking to represent. Yeah, I think those are the things I would continue or hope for when we get back into the room can start to do.
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna like dovetail and then go back to COVID. I was thinking about this recently. Like, I don't know if there would be any way that any director, but especially white directors, could put in their contract or could ask for their contract to include some sort of diversity rider that's like, I'm not going to sign this unless you can guarantee, if you're not involved in choosing the design team and you're not involved in casting, which often is the case depending on where you're working, but like, I need the guarantee that the design team will be 50% BIPOC and the cast, whatever the metrics are. Otherwise, I'm not going to sign it, because I think, and then you have to be like ready to walk on that actually, and be like, I'm not going to take this gig. And I think the other part of it for opera directors in particular is like, if you're white and someone offers you a Porgy and Bess, you have to say no. If you're white and somebody offers you a Madame Butterfly, you have to say no. Like, it's not. I think that we white directors and white artists in general and white people in general need to be very specific about kind of setting these boundaries, because we're the perpetrators. We have to do the work. The other thing I will say about that is tangibly in staging, like, well, this, I guess, so first, like, as white people, we need to do, like, it is our job to begin and undergo the major rehabilitation that we all need to unlearn our own racist implicit biases. And if we don't do that on an individual and private level, it won't, like, policy is great and metrics are important, but ultimately we won't see any sort of real systemic change anywhere, and definitely not in the rehearsal room when we're the ones who are leading. So I think, and of course that process, like, you're never done, like, you're never going to check that box, but starting the process and being really committed to the process in an ongoing way is crucial. And then I think from there, like, once you're kind of inhabiting that mind space more regularly and you're starting to, like, literally reroute your neural pathways, then you can be more aware of, like, is the way I'm staging this, like, could this be interpreted in a particularly racialized way? Or, like, how am I speaking to this Black cast member? Or how am I addressing this chorus? Or, whatever it is, I really think it starts, I fully think that institutions need to be introducing new policy and, like, hiring practices and everything, but I really think that it starts as from a personal place. Mm-hmm. That's what I'll say. Oh, and then COVID, I agree with everything Pascale said. And also, I imagine that we might need to introduce some sort of rehearsal room rhetoric, a la the way we talk about romantic and sexual intimacy, of, like, are you comfortable? Can I touch you? Are you comfortable? Like Pascale said, are you comfortable touching this other colleague of yours? Kind of, because, like, friends of mine now are like, you come within 6 feet of them, even with masks, and it's like, whoa. So right. I think we have to kind of be sensitive to different people's comfort level once we're able to be back in the rehearsal room, which I also don't think will happen until there's a vaccine. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, what about you, Mary? What do you think will you do differently in the rehearsal room due to the current topics and current events, or events that have, been historical? Do you see anything?
Are you guys going to answer too, Michael?
Oh, I should. Yeah, I guess I should. Huh.
You answer first, and then I'll.
Okay. So, Michael, do you want to go first?
You go.
Okay. So I think the first thing, let's addressing COVID first. I too agree with what Pascale said about keeping everything super hygienic, super clean. I was talking earlier in our backstage about how some companies in Europe are still going ahead and performing, though they're socially distancing and wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe that is the way to go when we first start going back into the rehearsal process, is thinking of ways. I mean, I don't know if this goes to the performer or the director, but thinking of ways that we can stage things and be in a space with each other where we're socially distanced, but also once we've been around each other because usually a rehearsal process is 3 to 4 weeks, right? So once we've been around each other for quite some time and we see that no one is having any symptoms, maybe then we can start condensing the way that we're interacting to a little bit of a closer space. So slowly integrating with physical contact. I don't know if that's the answer, but it definitely will make me think about the way that I interact with colleagues and the way that, because especially with singing, I mean, honey, spit flies, okay? Like, sorry about it. Like, it happens.
Yeah.
And we have to be really careful about those things now, and how far we kind of are willing, not are willing to take things, but how we, I guess, interact with each other. Really thinking about your own personal space and needs, and also fully thinking about the needs and personal space with other people. And then, as far as Black Lives Matter and diversity and equity and inclusion, I think that something that I can do as coming into a company is, if I see something, to say something. Just like the MTA, right? So I mean, I've been in spaces where I felt, and this is not even with just because I identify as Black, but not even with Black people, but with other cultures as well. I've been around in spaces where I've heard, people say things that are totally inappropriate. And and as I've become more socially aware, right? Because everybody has to take on this like role of their implicit bias. We all have to start thinking about the way that we're biased toward all people. So I've definitely been in spaces where I felt like things have been said that were, well, inappropriate. And most of the time I have spoken up, but there's also been times where it feels like, oh, this is my first week here. This is my, this is my first day here in a new company. I just heard this. What do I do? So it's about also being able to have a plan and for within the rehearsal room when something like that comes up, because it's going to come up. Someone's going to say something that's inappropriate, and you as the individual have to have a plan of action that's appropriate as well as effective. So yeah, I think having your own personal plan of action will be something that I take into the rehearsal space.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking, because I think we've all been in a rehearsal room where we've heard something or seen something that is like really inappropriate. And yeah, if you see something, say something. And I think if I see something, I say something, but I don't always say it to them. And I think you know, if it's appropriate, or even if it's not appropriate. But I think the person like doing the harmful thing needs to be made aware that what they just did is not okay.
Mhm.
And it's harmful. So like in my position as a pianist, usually a rehearsal pianist in a room, I think my strongest connection is to the conductor, who is often, you know, someone who doesn't say something great. We've all seen it happen. And you know, when I have seen it happen, you know, I'll go to the person that it affects and be like, almost like apologize for them. But I think something that is going to be stronger is to, you know, talk to the person who did it, to talk to the conductor. And you know, there are those fears like, oh, well, am I going to get fired because of this? Like, what's going to happen? But I don't think that's a good enough reason not to stand up and talk to them.
Definitely.
And then in terms of COVID, yeah, as a pianist, have my hand wipes, Clorox the piano,
Yeah.
maybe wear some gloves. I don't know.
I was gonna ask, would you be able to wear like gloves and play? Would that be weird? Would that be uncomfortable?
It would definitely be weird. I don't think it would be impossible, but I mean, it's also not going to be an issue if I'm just washing my hands. You know, I just have to, like, I can touch things and just if I'm very conscious about, you know, really scrubbing down my hands to the bone, then we'll be good. But like in the smaller rehearsal rooms, you know, coaching with singers, I've been in some coaching studios that are way too small, and no matter what sort of, I mean, they're 6 feet. Like the room is 6 feet, so you know, social distancing isn't really an option. So I don't know if like plexiglass barriers can help this, or you know, just finding different spaces to have these personal coachings, because I think that's still a very important part of the process, is to have these one-on-one coachings. And yeah, it needs to happen safely though.
For sure. Yeah.
These are such inspiring answers. I think for me, the biggest one is with regards to the exceptional amount of consciousness that has come into our sphere via the weird time gift that COVID has given us, plus the horrifying events that have happened in this country. At the hands of our government and the police, and also like our biases, or some of our biases. And I think that the thing that you said, Elliot, about if I see something, say something, it's like, am I always living my values? And am I communicating those values very clearly on the first day of rehearsal in regards to, this is an anti-racist space. So the way we're going to practice that is by, and it's an anti-sexist space. It's a not misogynistic space. So how we're going to, and you know, it's a loving space. And if you see something or hear something intolerant, the way we're going to practice disarming our own biases is by asking, if somebody says, you know, that's a really racist thing to say, or, you know, hey, like, I want to talk to you about this thing. You don't defend yourself. You say, why? Tell me, like, educate me, and let's talk more about it. I think that kind of like freak out that happens in rehearsal room, not only does it undermine the ability to communicate with each other, like moving forward in the process, because I've certainly been there, I think, with actors or with singers or with conductors or and on both ends of it, like, this is this thing, like, this is, you know, this is wrong. And then not had the conversation about why. So I think like taking the time to slow us down and do that work is important. And also really establishing the rules of belonging in the room at the beginning of the process. I think this COVID thing is a total nightmare with props, with piano.
Think about props.
I mean, just imagine those days where you come into rehearsal. I don't know, Ellen and Pascale, whether you have this sensation, but like when you come into rehearsal and everybody's kind of like everywhere, touching everything, and like it's like fun babies playing in a pen, and everyone's like and there's no control of any kind. And I'm hoping that like, because all of us feel these responsibilities for our own bodies and our own souls that have been handed to us. Or I think if you're a conscious person in the past month, I'm hoping that people will be more focused on what can I do to contribute to the community positively? Like, how am I affecting you? So I think like the looking outward and also the value check. Those are the two big buckets of things into which so many different behaviors go.
I love that value check. That's great. I mean, I think part of what we're being charged with as a nation right now is to shift our thinking as Americans from being highly individualistic to being highly collective. And so hopefully, assuming that like kind of seeps into our minds, like that spirit will come into these sort of microcosmic spaces like rehearsal rooms.
Which is funny because like as theater artists, like our job is to work as a collective, right? Like we can't do the work without the designers, the actors, the stage managers, the crew. Like we have to, like, that's why I love doing theater, because I'm always working with a group of people. I'm like only by myself if I'm trying to figure out a moment to block, but I could ask my assistant or ask an actor. But I think that's what's so great about like, that's why sometimes I feel like theater people or artists, we get it. We understand. They just don't want to listen to us and they think we're wrong. Whatever. That's how I feel, obviously.
In fluff.
Well, I think so the next question we have is from Pascale, and it's very similar to the previous question.
Great mind, Pascale.
So Pascale, did you want to read your question and kind of expand on what you meant by that question?
Sure. So my question was, what do you think we will have to change post-COVID in terms of how we create and perform? And I think we've talked a little bit about like this idea. I think, Mary, you talked about it. After someone sees a performance, or if someone buys a ticket, this opportunity to see it live streamed, or maybe things will be streamed now. Or if, you know, I'm in this world of like, what does it mean to be a theater artist? And is that just it? Is there other things I have to consider too? And in this world of Zoom performing, I've done like a couple of Zoom things, and I'm still like trying to understand what that world is like. And is that something that's viable? Is that going to live on afterwards? So I'm always curious to hear what other artists are thinking and doing too.
I love that. That's
So great.
Question.
So great.
Mary, do you wanna start?
I do. I have a bunch of different answers for this. I think it's a fantastic question, and I think we're all being forced to think of like all the different ways which we can create in. The two things that I've been working on and have been writing. I've been like writing a lot and taking a screenwriting class, and I think that like thinking about ourselves as content generators rather than, and this is, I think, particularly for directors who end up, and musicians who end up being the kind of, well, directors more, I think, being the editors of somebody else's art and not owning any of it ourselves. Yeah, Pascale. And then I've been doing this, filming a Zoom opera, which is a puppet opera, actually, which is kind of like
awesome.
It's been great to learn how to direct still things. Like lovely, actually, because I'm like cast. I'm amusing myself like too much, actually. But that kind of like filming things and setting up lighting, and it's stuff that kind of we inherently know how to do because we work in a technical way, but it so rarely is coupled with the control that a camera gives you. That's interesting. So those are the two things, like figuring out other ways to kind of work around this time.
Oh, I love the puppets. That's so cool.
When will it be released?
Talk about it. Yeah. It will be released it will have to be done July 31st. So I'll keep you posted, but I don't know. It's going slow.
I have also been doing some writing. I had the same crisis of like, but my art is with the other people and I'm now alone. What do I make and have also been writing and have found that very nourishing. My hope, this also kind of ties into my question, which is about repertoire, but my hope when we come back to the theater is that we might see the decline of the like massive proscenium works, and that we might see which we, I think we were already sort of starting to see in the opera industry at least, a shift towards smaller casts and smaller instrumental ensembles that can be produced in smaller spaces and that are ultimately more cost effective. And I think oftentimes more artistically compelling just because of the proximity of the audience to the performers. So, I mean, I think at least for a while, it won't be realistic to have like a 50-person chorus on stage and a 50-person crew backstage and a 100-person pit and, like these kind of major forces of people that we require for these major productions. So I think I'm really curious to see how companies will be kind of obligated to shift their focus away from those sorts of productions and focus on smaller works, which tend to mean focusing on newer works, at least in opera, though that's not always the case. And maybe we'll see some adaptations of these kind of like war horses for a reduced cast or whatever. But yeah, that's my thinking in terms of like if and when we're returning to the stage.
Yeah, a part of that question that sticks out to me is post-COVID, right? Well, you don't really know when that's going to be, and to plan any sort of theater event takes a lot of time. So I think we're going to see as we start to go in the other direction, we'll see things that are hybrid, like we were talking about, things that can be live streamed, but you can also come to the theater because they have to plan for, the possibility of people not wanting to come or not being able to come for whatever reason. So I think this, hybrid of digital and live performance is going to become popular.
Yeah. I just came up with a thought, because I was kind of like, Ellen mentioned, having the 50-person chorus and the people in the crew in the back and the pit and orchestra. And, I think we also have now the unique ability to, in a weird way, as far as like chorus and orchestra, be able to have all of that done off-site individually and sync that together until we're able to come together in the space, right? So maybe if you have a show that requires, even as much as just 30 singers, right? And then the main characters, there's only maybe like 6. That definitely would reduce the amount of contact that you have to have with another person, but you're also still getting the real richness of individual voices, right? So maybe being able to play the chorus electronically, and then even like having, them in the back. I mean, it's such a new, like juicy, creative way of thinking, right? That like, you could even have them on individual screens. I mean, there's so many different things that we could do, and even have them streaming live.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
So
you could have them on like, did you see that? I think it was in Japan. They had like a graduating class of robots, like go across.
Seriously,
like iPads.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Conceptually, you could do so much interesting stuff with that because the chorus could then take on like all these kind of like amorphous.
Exactly.
Save a lot of costume budget.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can even say like, okay, well, the money that we would typically use on costumes or on the staff, on extra things, right, that are ingrained in having to have people there, you can use that for the streaming or the projection or all of these other aspects that, like, you would typically have to use money for.
Mhm.
That's really smart.
And it still employs the individual artists and the
Right.
choristers, but it also keeps things safe. So I think maybe we'll see some of that happening too. And listen, I'm one of those people. We will see holograms coming in the next 10 years.
You're right.
Easy holographic images coming in the next 10 years. And I think that if a company wants to be really ahead of the game and they have the budget for it, it may be kind of a good thing to start investing in that kind of technology. I mean, I know it's like really a little bit out there, but hey, we're in 2020, honey. This is time for technological innovation. So I think that post COVID and I guess in the midst of getting to post COVID, we'll start to see a lot of creative ways of bringing in individual singers, but also bringing in the choristers and bringing in, the things that we need to make the performances happen.
I
That's
love that.
genius, Elliot. I'm going to steal that idea.
Please do.
You're
Please.
first, Elliot Page.
Yeah, I'll credit you for sure. Don't worry.
Thank you.
So,
But what about you, Pascale? What do you think?
I don't know. Like, I love this idea that you have, Ellie. It's mind blowing. I can only imagine the different things that you could do that you couldn't do beforehand. I know for me, I'm really curious about what it means to incorporate more technology into theater. I've like done a handful of shows where I've done some kind of technology, but that's like very small projections or a projection that's like moving across the stage throughout the entire show. So small kinds of integration of technology, nothing as major. So I feel like there's like a whole other learning curve we all have to start being on a little bit better. Like just sometimes the idea of Instagram and TikTok can be overwhelming for me. So to just like figure out like how can I embrace that more is really what I'm interested in. But I do, I loved Mary what you said about this idea of creating content, and I think that's something that I'm trying to be more focused in, like this idea of, because we need more content. We need to just be able to see different kinds of perspectives and stories and not worry about, oh, have we done this? Like, I feel like the big question I get from people who are in the theater world is like, but is it producible? If people don't know it, are they going to come see them? Like, well, it's a pandemic. People are bored. They're going to want to see something. And I'm 10 times out of 10, no one really wants to see Shakespeare. The people who, it is I will say that to the day I die. No one is more excited to see Shakespeare than some new thing. Like, I love Shakespeare. I get it. But there's so much other work that we just haven't been able to expose ourselves to. And I'm really excited for what comes out of this. And I think that's the thing that's really getting me through it, is like, there's going to be so much more to explore once we have the opportunity to like get it all done and have people to expose it and really integrate into different mediums. Like, I was telling a class I was teaching a couple of weeks ago, like, I feel like Zoom theater is going to be a genre of theater now. It's like, just like radio plays or podcasts, like, we're going to move into a different kind of medium that will be an option, and not just something that's like experiment. Like, it could be something people could just make theater just off of just that from now on. Who knows?
Yeah.
You're inspiring so many ideas in my head. I just came up with a whole new one.
Yes.
Elliot, share it. What is it?
Well, I was thinking, so a lot of people have this desire to be a part of the arts, be a part of the theater, and they either don't, they may be working, regular jobs, and they just don't have either the time, finances, ability to be able to like get in and try it, right? And having a digital platform, you now have space to say, okay, well, what if I send out kind of like what we were talking about backstage with Duryea and his like digital reads, right? Now you have a way to maybe do like these kind of virtual new plays, right? Like short plays or something, and you have 10 people who've never, almost like an improv class. You have 10 people who have never, acted before necessarily, but you can give them a script and they can learn their lines and interact virtually in a way that they may not have been able to do before because they couldn't find a class in their area, or they couldn't, do these things that they've always wanted to do and just never could before. So maybe using that space too, like you were saying, Zoom theater. I mean, I think that's a fabulous idea, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
that,
it's there. The need and demand is there. I think people are finding out that there is more we can do. And that I've seen some things like this happen. Like there's a Boston theater platform that's coming out that's like it's like a camp theater, but they're doing like different camp stories as episodes. And so every other week these different actors and playwrights and directors are set up. So I think like it's clearly like people are interested in it. So I'm hopeful that it doesn't stop, or that it can continue, and maybe we can see more, and I think my end game to all this is like, okay, we see there is demand for this interest and people want it. Maybe that means that the government will be like, oh, let's invest money in the arts so that
right.
we don't have to worry about bailing them out, or hopefully the NEA will do the work. Like, I know that's a pipe dream, but if other countries could do it, maybe one day we'll get our act together too. But I think, that's like, it's clear that we need it. We need the arts so much more now than ever.
Yeah.
So why not put our money there for it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Very
curious also to see, as we move forward into technology-based theater, and I love that idea, Elliot. I think that's brilliant and like a really exciting and feasible way to make, create more accessibility. I'm curious to see if we'll see more works that are intentionally created for the technological space rather than adapting works that were meant for the stage originally. I've seen some of that, like Kamala Sankaram wrote a new opera for Zoom that here Arts Center produced, and it's starting to happen. I just think it'll be exciting, because there's so many things you can do with like the cameras and the switching and the people and all of this stuff, and I think it'll be cool.
Me too. Totally. Well, Pascal mentioned how you mentioned Shakespeare and how our repertoire and things will change possibly over the course of the next few years, which leads perfectly into Ellen's question, which is a
Thank you,
great question.
Set it up. My question is, do you think we'll see a change in the production of the standard or classical repertoire in theater? This could mean Shakespeare, Chekhov, etc., and opera are European inherited rep in the American theater and opera house, and should we produce these works, and if so, why?
I'm over it. I don't need to see another Shakespeare play. I don't need to see another Chekhov play. I'll say I'm fine with like inspirations, adaptations inspired by like there's so much of that too. I think I was talking to a friend of mine, like, you can't, like, don't forget, like, She's the Man is inspired by Twelfth Night. Like these, even pop culture things that we love are inspired and taken from these great works. But I don't think they have to be the end all be all. And I think we're seeing, we were seeing it before the pandemic started, this like renaissance of new great work by artists of color, by queer artists. And I think I'm hopeful that it's just the beginning of the momentum. And I think the other thing that's been really great to see is lots of institutions being charged to decolonize their work, their syllabuses, the productions that they're having in their schools. And I think that can also bring more of a wide variety of not only the work we see, the artists we see, and the audience we're able to engage with. That's the thing I'm the most excited about. By straying away from the usual, we can bring a wider kind of audience into this work. There's a reason why the median age or the median demographic of a theater participant or audience member is a middle-aged white woman over 60, because the work is serving to that narrative. So what could the world of theater look like if we were to have more opportunities for artists of color and queer artists to have their work be seen, so that their community can be welcomed within that space? So I think I'm hopeful that we continue, that it's not just a pause for now and like, well, we were in the pandemic, so of course. But I'm here for the movement to change, for us to, Shakespeare can be read, sure, but Shakespeare and Chekhov and these these westernized artists that we continue to lift up can't be the only ones that we serve.
I have to say two things off of that. Or that's Pascale, that was so smart, and I just want to respond right away. Which is one thing is that looking back to these time periods where there were other artists composing or writing and unacknowledged as geniuses in their day, and like now I just discovered this play. I don't know if any of you know it. It was actually produced, I think, in a Boston by a was it a Philadelphia company? A company recently in February, I found a production, but called Rachel by Angelina Grimke. Anybody know this? So
but I know about Angelina Grimke.
Yeah, she's a super famous writer of her day in the 19-teens, and it was a melodrama like personal story about a Black woman who was a Northern Black woman and who discovers throughout the play that her mom moved her up north because her father and her younger brother were lynched. And it's a 3-act drama. It's completely personal, and her story is so beautifully explicated. It's like, why are we not doing this as well as, if we're like programming is not the same. Eugene O'Neill, who is the same period. Why are we not doing this play instead? Like, it doesn't make any sense. People have been really enraged about Lorraine Hansberry not being in the like pantheon of the greats. And I think it's because, this idea of the genius creator is an exclusively white male idea, I think.
Right.
And I think it's so like it almost, as you discover the sort of other works that were happening during these periods and the possibility for lifting those works up and elevating those voices and allowing them to be like re-honored. I think that that's a really compelling replacement for your Shakespeare in your season, for this foreseeable future. Yes. I think the other thing I was going to say is, the prevalence of the white male voice on the opera stage is just like undeniable and horrifying. And so I think in order to, like, if you look at the Met season last year, it was like there were no creators of color. There's one woman conductor, and by creators of the productions producer, obviously composer, conductor, director, librettist. That's what we're talking about. These 4 like voices that would contribute to telling the story from a different perspective. There was one female conductor hired for the entire season. And so you're like, how do we change that? And I think it's new works, but it's also there have been works composed by women. There have been works composed by people of color. Like there have been these things, and they have just been put to the side because there's an assumption. And it's interesting that you say white women who are a middle age, whatever. I would imagine that those women believe that they are part of the patriarchy and have yet to be disabused of that notion or haven't gotten conscious around it, because we're actually just heralding the white male voice. We're not actually hearing to those voices at all, at least in New York theater. We're always going for, really what we're doing is their husbands. And the same in the casting, the same in the whole thing is just fucked. So I would say, I don't know if you're allowed to say that in a bill.
You're okay.
So I think that we have to take a look at this repertoire situation. And I certainly, what you said earlier, Ellen, I never want to direct Madame Butterfly. I never want to direct Porgy and Bess. I don't even know that like Black singers, and actually, Ellen, I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about Porgy and Bess. Like, do you want to be in it? Like, is that an interesting thing? And I know people feel both ways. Anyway, ready to pass. Go.
Yeah, so I can actually answer that for you.
Please.
So I've been in 3 different productions of Porgy and Bess, and it's so weird. For me, the music is fab. The music is incredible. And being around colleagues who have experiences that are similar to yours is what really actually makes it, it's what makes you want to do it. Because you get to interact in a way that you really can't normally. You're usually one of 3, one of 2, the only one. And so you get to be so much more, I think, open, and you you see part of yourself in a story. Though I think Porgy is very problematic when it comes to the spaces of, I guess, like caricatures
Mhm.
of people of the time period. And also, like, it's kind of, yeah, it's very, you know what I mean? And which can be, I don't know. I think for me, I would love to perform something with colleagues who are represented diversely that's not just Porgy and Bess.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I would love to do another show that's an all black cast, or I would love to do another show where there's so much more diversity. I would love to do a queer show. I've never done a queer opera. Like, are you
Mhm.
kidding me? That's like,
I think there's one
oh,
girl.
you know what I mean? It's like, but it would be so interesting because you get to share your experiences in such a way that I think it lifts the production. That's why when people see Porgy and Bess, they're like, oh my God, this is why don't people do this more often? Like, what? This is incredible. And it's because there's a bond that happens backstage. Because typically, also, the director, conductor, pianists, producers are all white, right? So the only people that you can identify with are your cast members.
Mhm.
And it just, I mean, even in orchestras, like the people who are playing in the pit, if there's one, which is even more, I think, I don't see as many people of color in the orchestra, but if there's one or two black people in the orchestra, typically when I'm doing Porgy, we will have dialogue, where usually there really is not that much dialogue between the singer and the orchestra members. And so for me to have a sense of diversity on the stage, it opens up the space to be able to communicate with not just your own members that you're performing with, but also with the directors and the conductors and the orchestra members and the crew members.
Mhm.
It just creates such a more open space. And specifically to Porgy, I think most of us black people, if we didn't have to do another Porgy to supplement our income, then we probably would not. And would love to do other repertoire that puts us in a light that's honest and not
Mhm.
caricaturized on the stage. So, yeah, that's my opinion.
I
Well,
think it's like
yeah.
also why isn't that openness and collaboration able to flourish in any rehearsal? Like why are we
Mhm.
Exactly.
why do we have that's a
Yeah,
great
because also in just the normal repertoire, right? We could have that. We
Mhm.
could have a sense of diversity within the cast, and well, it doesn't happen. And then
Right.
a lot of times everyone has been having this discussion of, well, the company does a show that's a black show or a diverse show, and then the next season they don't, and then it's like, well, where are the people that you just hired? Where's the diversity when the show isn't when it's not necessary?
Right.
Right? Where is
It's
the
like
diversity? Go ahead, Michael.
you see this diversity as like a segregated event. It's like, oh,
Right.
well, here are the people, but just in this show, and then they're gone. And I mean, yeah,
I actually felt that way about our Bohème, Elliot, was that it was a super diverse lead cast
Oh my God.
and crew. Our team was all diverse. But we were really the only show in the season.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. For the most part, yeah. I mean, but, and when I walked into the rehearsal room and I looked around and I said, oh my God, all of the leads just about are of color. There's diversity in this storytelling. Like, and of course, it's Bohème. There should be. These people should be
Right.
the people who were quote unquote on the fringe of society at the time, right? And so, like, why have we not had this before? It opened my eyes in a way that I want to thank you for that, Mary. I mean, I'm thinking, you kind of went about telling the story with diversity in mind and
That was,
inclusion
but
in
that
mind.
was exactly with the design team and Pascale and Ellen. I have gotten to a place where I won't work without an exclusive design team of women and people of color. I just don't do it. I don't hire them. I won't do it. Period.
Awesome.
It's not.
Yeah.
So that is there. That's about that sharing.
Mhm.
And the space feels different. It feels more inclusive. I mean, it
Yeah.
feels like you can express yourself and be yourself because you don't feel like you're the only one.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, you don't feel
Mhm.
like you're the only one. And I don't think anyone likes to feel that way, no matter
Yeah.
what space you're working in.
Right.
Yep.
Like you're the representative or the spokesperson.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'll say, I think it's clear like leadership also makes that happen so well. Like the director in the room, the person who's like clearly Mary, you were able to like give that space in the room. And it's like it's people like you, like Ellen, like the people who are doing that work that make it important because some people don't even understand that. Like I loved Ellen, the fact that you were able to understand the importance of it. People who are producing Porgy and Bess and Madame Butterfly, they should look like the people of the show. Like it makes the show better. Like it will make the show better. And it's, I think my hope is that not only do we move away from the repertoire, but we continue to uplift the people who are doing that work
Yeah.
and put them in the room instead of the people who aren't. Like they need to retire. They need to go to sleep. Like let's bring in the people who are doing the work that make people want to come back, that
Right.
make us excited to like see that contract. Like, yes, oh, I'm so excited for this director. Like those are the rooms that I get the most excited in, and those people are the ones who continue to uplift it.
Yeah.
Could I-
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to. I just want to hop in because it relates to what Pascale was just talking about, and seeing the old, the old kind
Old
of crew,
guard.
the old guard, taking a step back, or not even taking a step back, but working together, right?
Right.
And for me, that I can give an exact example of why that is necessary, right? I'm in rehearsal for Porgy and Bess. The conductor, the part where there's like kind of like church shouting, right? Like church shouting, leaving for the promised land, right? And the conductor comes up and he's kind of like, well, we have to make sure we're paying attention to the beat. We have to make sure we're paying attention to the beat. And we have the direct part of the directorial team, saying like, okay, well, really, like, let us feel what it's like when you're in church, right? So think about that. Let us know what it's like when you're in church. And then the conductor says, well, also, your church is different than my church, so I don't know what happens in your church, but be free. Let us see what happens in your amazing services.
What?
The problem there is that
Which one? Which
you
one?
have many problems, but one of the main problems is that you see, not you, but they see all Black people
Right.
as the same, and that we've all had the same experience, and we've all had the same religious experience, and we all have the
Right.
same background, and we don't.
Nope.
We really do not. And that's where bringing in a team of people who have diverse thoughts and are diverse and have experiences which are diverse will really lend itself to say, well, that was kind of fucking stupid to say, but people but you don't realize these
Right.
things. Like, people don't realize these things in the moment, right? They thought that they were being helpful. They thought that they were being inclusive. They thought that they were, trying to enhance the story, but really, and in the moment, we too, as the actors, as the singers, thought, okay, well, we're trying to get into it and they're trying to encourage us. And then afterward, you sit there and you're like, oh my God, I just got like played through the white gaze.
Well, and the other thing, like, it's so important to have diversity on the creative team because that language of like, we show us what it's like.
Exactly.
It's so exploitative. We
Yep.
have this habit in the opera industry of like exploiting Black performers and Black voices, I think in particular, for our entertainment. I mean, like that Porgy and Bess to me feels like white people like in a window looking into and then like videotaping it, like or like rather like
Amazing
concept.
Mhm.
Writing down what they saw and then like regurgitating it as they want to hear it and see it. And so like, yeah, I mean, the kind of dichotomy, and also like that the leaders of the, like, actors are beholden to the leadership of the room to some degree. And so I think, I mean, they shouldn't necessarily be, but oftentimes. And so, of course, you're like, yes, you know, yes, conductor, I'll try to do what you want. And yes, director, I'll try to do what you want. And if the conductor and the director don't have that perspective themselves, then there's no, like, it's completely inequitable.
Exactly.
It also made me think something that I wanted to talk about earlier too is, do you, Pascale and Ellen particularly, and Elliot and Michael, I'd be really interested to hear what you think of this. Have you been feeling that the role of director is redundant at all, given the fact that like directing over Zoom just means people taking responsibility for what is shown anyway? Like I've been feeling like, why do we even do this? This is dumb.
Yeah, I felt that way for Zoom at least. I'm like, what is my job here to like make sure people turn off their mic and not turn off their mic? Like, is that a stage manager? It's like, am I a stage manager? Am I a videographer? I think sometimes even when like we were in the room, sometimes I equate it to like parenting, making sure all the kids are okay and they're doing all their work and they've got everything done, they're fed and they know what time it is. And it's just to make and to support them, because you know they never do. They never know when their break is. I was in a rehearsal room once when we were, no matter what, we finished our 20-minute break, we were never back on time. Never back on time. Always a 20 always became a 30 because they never knew what time it was. But you know, whatever, we do the work. But I think sometimes I do feel that like, what am I doing in this room? And am I actually making things happen? And is it coming through? And I think sometimes I'm just like trusting that the actors are listening, because you can't make them listen all the time. Like I love my performers, but they also have their own ideas, and I think that's why sometimes I try to think of myself more as a collaborator and a listener, and being able to like give them space to explore. And if it works, I'll hopefully get it. But yeah.
I've done a little bit of Zoom directing now. And yeah, I mean, you don't have the like your own like connection with the people, but I find it's a good opportunity to do some more like inside out directing. Whereas when you're in a rehearsal room and maybe you have like a giant show and you're like, I just got to stage it. And this gives you more of an opportunity to do more like kind of coaching focused acting work rather than staging. That I've enjoyed. But yeah, sometimes, you know, I sometimes I feel like I'm doing it right as a director when I feel like I didn't direct it. I'm like, oh, you know, this doesn't belong to me, but like that's kind of the point by the time it gets to the stage. So yes, sometimes I feel redundant, but like in a good way.
Michael, you go.
Redundancy as a director. Well, I mean, it depends on, you know, who is part of the show and you know what the show is and what personal experience you as a director can bring to it. And if like the people and the characters in the show, if the actors, you know, are closer related to the actual characters, then I think, you know, you have to take that into consideration and listen to them more, and you know, have it be, I mean, this is just how I think of directors in general. I don't know if the question was more like about now with Zoom or whatever, but in turn, I think I'm thinking like white people directing for you best. In the past, like you have to listen to the black people that are like they know better than you. They are in this role, and but yeah, like speaking to redundancy in terms of Zoom theater. I don't know. I haven't had a lot of experience with Zoom theater. I have had experience with Zoom coaching, however, and it sucks.
Right?
It's totally, and you know, I have to keep checking in with them. I'm like, well, what are you feeling? What are you hearing? Because what I'm getting on this end is not, you know, what's actually happening. Which, you know, is different than, you know, watching and directing. But that's kind of my experience with it. I have to really be connected with them and keep checking in to see.
But the performer has to be their own best advocate and guardian and like inside person. And I love that aspect of it. That feels so good. It's like agency.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Totally. I can't do anything.
Oh, sorry, Michael. I don't want to cut you.
I was just gonna say, I think with all the Zoom stuff happening too, it's like, well, they know what's in their house and what like props they have
Right.
and what space they have to work with, what their lighting is.
Right.
So there's only so much a director can do when it comes to filming in people's own apartments and houses.
Right.
Remotely.
Yeah.
They're their own design.
Green screen.
I was gonna say, I think, well, Michael, something that you said was we have to listen to the actors when it comes to, like certain shows. I think when it comes to the culture of a show, right? But it can be a very dangerous idea because in order for a show that's supposed to take place in the 1930s, right, to really make a mark, that would imply that we, as the people who are doing the show, would have to know how people thought in the 1930s, right? And that's part of the work of the dramaturg.
Mhm.
Right.
So if you have a dramaturg who is not able to get into the mindset of the people and the culture of that time period, then they're not going to be able to inform the actors or singers or musicians in general in which ways we're supposed to react, right? Because in 2020, we're not going to move the same way that people did in the
Right.
1920s and 30s.
Right.
So it's about listening to, maybe asking questions, right? Asking like, well, what do you think, or giving like almost like an assignment, right? Like, if you identify as African American and you have parents who are still alive or were alive in the 30s and 40s, or grandparents, were alive in the 30s and 40s, could you take the time to give them a call and ask them about their experience in the time period, right? And of course, there's also going to be a big difference from who was in the North and who was in the South in relation to what you're talking about in a story. So, in my opinion, I think that's part of what makes a director. It's giving prompts, giving questions, ideas for the actors to really think about and like you said, do the self-analyzation of the character. Who is your character? All of those questions, because for me, I like having a director that has strong ideals. For me, that is helpful because I can play into that character.
Right.
But sometimes there is like that space of, well, I don't really think like a person who was, so if you're doing an opera and it's supposed to take place in the 1980s in the drag ballroom scene, because I have a colleague who's actually working on that called Legendary.
So
And-
great.
Right. And so it's like, but you also, if you're a part of that culture, right? So like I've know people who are in the ballroom scene in the 1980s. There's certain colloquialisms or sayings that like you would not say during that time period. So it's also, I think, this beautiful, or it should be, this beautiful symbiotic relationship between director and conductor and artist, or not artist, but actor, and using their own life experiences, but also using the lens of whatever story the director is trying to tell. Because the director has to have a sense of the story that they're trying to tell about the work. The work cannot be just, oh, I'm directing this because this is what it says to do.
Right.
Have to have a lens to direct through, right? And I think that's the importance of a director, is having a lens to see a story through and being creative in that way. So I think that directors are, in my opinion, very valuable because not everyone can do that, and not everyone can can take a story and see it through a different space. So I think you're so valuable, and even in the time of Zoom things, I think that taking a moment and saying, okay, well, yes, we're doing this through Zoom, and there's only but so much I can do, but let me give you a couple of ideas to think about this. Let me give you a certain way of thinking. Okay, well, you can play on, if you're supposed to be playing a 13-year-old, maybe changing your where you're facing the camera, right? So that you have to look up in order, instead of looking down. You can use these things to emphasize your character, and I think as directors, you all can really play on those type of things.
Beautiful.
Yes, I'm ready.
That was like a
I
support.
feel empowered.
I know.
I wrote the 13-year-old thing down, so thank you. Just in case.
We can have all our jobs.
I know, seriously. So big. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I think it's very valuable. That's a beautiful question, Mary. I really like that question.
Yeah.
You know,
Did you
it
post that? Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask why you posted that question, or what sort of feelings of redundancy maybe you were feeling.
Oh, just the idea that like, you know, I think we like control. I mean, I'm going to generalize, Pascale and Ellen, please forgive me. Usually directors like control.
Yep.
So, like to an excessive degree. And so if you can't control literally the frame of the thing, because the person has whatever camera they have and whatever audio they have and wherever they have to film, honestly, and you just, that's what you're getting, then what is your artistic contribution visually, and how you can kind of find that control. I found like a lot of freedom in editing, actually, after the fact. But Elliot, that was such a beautiful way of saying, like, that fire initially, passing the fire and making sure that the fire is shared, even in this like sort of anodyne medium of Zoom, is so important and so beautiful. And whenever anybody does that to me in my direction, like you all have, the four of you have just been like, ooh, here's this like beautiful influx of idea and passion, then you can go and create, because you are energized by the presence of other humans and their ideas and their own selves and souls.
Yes.
I'm super excited. I have rehearsal after this, so I can't wait to do all this work. So thank you all. Thanks.
Well, that's one of the reasons I think when Michael and I were discussing kind of where we wanted to take the show and who we wanted to speak with, is I think something that's come out of having to be in the digital space is talking more, right? And it gives you such a room of like creative ability, and like to be really you have to be creative. There's no other choice but to be creative. And if you're not, then it'll be either boring, it'll be annoying to do, it'll become a chore. And if you're not thinking creatively and creating new ways of entertaining, then like, what are you doing? It can become like a chore. I mean, I felt like that with recording videos and things, like having to do that for companies. It's like, all right, here we go, another aria with my speaker next to me. But in order to make it more fun for myself, I have to create my own space. I have to be my own director. And so I think that task now is being thrown back to you all, and I think you're all going to have been and will and are stepping up to that challenge. So
that's both of you, space.
Wait, I missed it.
Did I say it? Or sometimes my audio cuts out. I said, happy to both of you by creating this space in the forum.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we you know, hey, we try to do what we can. But I've really enjoyed our discussion today. I don't know, does anyone, you know, do you all have any other questions that you'd like to ask each other? And I'm checking through the comment section to see if there's anything that anyone would like to share. But
just since we were talking about, you know, like conversation and digital connection and that needing to happen more, and you know, we have these conversations and we think, oh, this has been so nice, like I wish it would happen more. I mean, I think we're in a time where it can happen a lot.
Right.
I think we can also connect with our audiences, especially because they're all tuning in online digitally anyway. So I mean, we can, you know, survey them, we can communicate them, have a dialogue with them, and see if what we're creating is actually like hitting the mark, if it's doing what we're intending for it to do, or if are still blanks to be filled in? Are there still gaps?
Right.
Yeah, so
I see in the comments, Duryea said he has questions. So Duryea, we're looking to see where
It might be on the way.
you'd like to ask a question. I'm sure there's one on the way. But I really do see this as I was talking with wait, the question came in. So he said he was a little bit late to the conversation, but he wants to know, as directors, do you come in with the show already cast, or are you a part of the casting?
Mm.
And I guess that
Good
was specific to
question.
your medium, which you work with.
Sure.
Mine's really go for it, Pascale. Sorry.
No worries. I know for me, it's normally I'm a part of the casting. Sometimes there are some companies will have certain characters that have already been cast because maybe they've had a relationship or if they've done a development with this show previously, and that character is just slated. But most of the time, I have been part of the casting process from the get-go, and continue to figure out who gets what. It's very rare that I've heard of a director not being part of it, unless, like I said, it's a show that's already been cast and they're doing a remount of some sort and a different director.
In opera, it's usually cast unless it's a new production, and then usually somebody drops out or 2 or 3 people drop out, and then you get to slide in your friends, which is the best. I think the second part of Duryea's question is, if you're part of casting, are you focusing on keeping it diverse over talent?
Right.
No, like never has that been a contradiction for me. I mean, in my experience, I've never been like, oh, like here's this person, here's an Asian person, and here's a talented white person. Like we have to cast the Asian person. No, like no. But there are just so many talented people. That's always the question with casting is like there's 10 people who could be in every role, and we're very lucky as directors to be able to kind of pick amongst these beautiful performers and work with the best of the best. I love casting because it's like stretching the zone of what you imagine a character could be, and sort of dimensionalizing a person on a page. Yeah, it's a beautiful part of our job.
Totally. I would just add in regards to the whole like diversity versus talent thing. Totally. Like, it's never like I want to cast this talented person, but I must cast this person of color. I think more likely it's you are seeing a lot of talented people, as Mary said, and some of them are white and some of them are BIPOC. And then I think in that case, it's up to the director to make kind of like a choice of affirmative action, basically, and an intentional, cast in a color conscious way, if that. Depending, if that's something that you're committed to doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that conversation is also part of the vision of the show too, right? Like it's the director, and of course it depends on the show that you're doing. Like the director has to come in with the vision of what they want this cast to represent. I've been lucky enough that most of the shows that I work in are specifically about African diaspora. So it's normally always serving that community and within the casting. So it's finding what kinds of ways can we extrapolate that kind of diversity. And it's not just these kinds of people of color. We're opening up the lens so that there can be a variety of people who are seen and on stage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I think we have time for one more question. And the question is, when it comes to telling stories from a directorial standpoint, how do you approach directing accurately when it's from a POV other than your own, male, Asian, trans, etc.? That's a great question because I don't know if I have the answer to that myself.
I don't know that I have the answer to that either. I mean, I think if you find yourself in that position and you didn't say no, I guess so. Like it brings up another question, which is like, are people only allowed to tell stories that are theirs?
Right.
And I have very mixed feelings about that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on the story and it depends on who you are, and like there are a lot of kind of dynamics at play. But if you find yourself in that position, I think you have to come at the project with kind of a humble awareness of what you don't know, and what you and also kind of this understanding that at a certain level the human experience is universal, and so and kind of like figuring out how to marry those two things.
Yeah. I mean, I get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
No. I was just gonna. I think that's exactly right, and I think that it's interesting you say like stories that are yours or whatever, because I've been thinking a lot about like how like so what are white stories my stories, are Jewish stories my story, like all these intersecting identities that are
stories, your story.
Right.
that make us artists in the first place, I think, because we have an interest in storytelling that is like that takes us beyond our own experience. I have only, it's interesting, I'm working on a Barber of Seville, which is it's the coolest project I think I've ever been a part of. It is about a black barber shop, essentially. And it's a black, Will Liverman is writing it. And it's a Black Barber of Seville, but it's called The Factotum. And it's an hour-long, like, Hamilton treatment of the Barber of Seville. And Will started to talk to me about it, and I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with this. Let me be involved in whatever way. It's such a good idea. And it should be site-specific, and it should be all these things. And he was like, yes. And he was like, do you want to be the dramaturg? And I was like, but I don't know anything about like the black barber shop experience. And he goes, well, you actually know a lot about the show, which is true, because I just did my own adaptation of the Barber of Seville and translated it. And he was like, you know a lot about the show, and you know a lot about like structure of opera and like the collaboration between words and music. And so this may be an over kind of generalization, but it felt to me like he was saying, I'll carry the culture and you carry the structure, and in the middle. And like what I've been doing is a lot of, it's such a good idea, Duryea. I'm going to research, like I'm doing all this research, and there's tons of writing about the black barbershop culture and black masculinity. And, and it's awesomely documented. Like it's just beautiful. I mean, and so it's cool that I get to learn about this while working with someone I respect so much to tell a story that's not my own in any way, shape, or form. Like that's so clearly not my own. Yeah. I mean,
that totally speaks to what the question asked, though, is how do we figure it out? We do research. We do research, right? It's just like me as an actor, I'm playing a character which I have no clue what an 18th century white, I don't know, male wants to do. And I have to do research on how they walked, how they talked, what they did. But also I have to know that, well, I'm not him. Right. And so how do I put my own self into that? And I think it's all to do, like you were saying, about research. And if it's something that you're not familiar with, taking the time to get familiar with it, asking questions, becoming knowledgeable. It has a lot to do with all of it.
Yeah, and collaborating with people who understand that, right? I think that's the other thing. And you talked to this about the project, Mary, that you two are working together. It's not just it's not just you. And I've done this, I think, a couple times. I when I directed Marie and Rosetta, it's about Rosetta Tharpe, but it's written by a white man, George Brandt. And I'm not a big rock and roll aficionado, but I had a team that had people who knew her work and was able to understand her better. And then I directed this play a few years ago by an Asian playwright about this Asian American woman and her dealing with her religion, because she comes from a very Christian family, which isn't as common. So what does that mean to live in these different intersections? And, I selected that play because the school I was working with was predominantly of Asian diaspora. So I wanted to represent that culture and have a show that was able to work within their gaze, so they can understand how to access that work. And I think it's being able to work collaboratively with your artists and your team and have people who understand that work or understand that perspective and culture. And that research is that other element that really brings it to be an authentically done work that makes people not feel uncomfortable, but interested in being a part of it.
Right. Wow. Oh my goodness, I've learned a lot. I feel very inspired. I feel very inspired. So we're coming up to about that time.
Mhm.
We just want to say thank you for being a part of our What's the Tea. I know Michael might have a little bit more to say, and thanks in
Yeah,
collaboration.
I mean, I just want to thank you all, and if there's anything you want to leave everyone with, I know we were talking about what changes we can make. If there's you know a small change that you have the ability to make, what would it be like in the coming months or post COVID?
Get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel, at least like as far as the industry is concerned, more empowered than ever. Kind of what Mary said about living your values, to live my values and to not be not to no longer concern myself with like the trajectory of my career as it pertains to like climbing the ladder, and more about being like, what is meaningful to me? What is meaningful to the people I'm in the room with? What's going to like actually push us forward as a people, not, let alone as an art form.
Yes, here for
Totally.
that.
Totally agree. And it's like we get to rewrite the rules right now.
Right.
Perfect
Mhm.
time to rewrite.
Yes.
Yeah, we
Yes.
are at a blank slate. We're
Mhm.
starting
Yeah.
starting fresh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, I love that.
Oh, I want to thank you all for joining us here on What's
Thank
the Tea.
you.
To
Yes.
everyone watching and viewing.
Yes.
Um,
we
it's
well
been
we oh
lovely.
yeah, and
You wanna go?
also I'm gonna ask for you three ladies to hang on backstage, and we will have another episode. Also this is an important announcement. Our format is bi-weekly, or well, I guess not bi-weekly. Yeah, bi-weekly now. So we'll be releasing episodes or going live every 2 weeks instead of weekly, so that we can make sure that we have time and a nice range of guests to come on and share their experiences. So I hope you tune in 2 weeks from today. And thank you so much for
Thank
being here,
you.
and
Thank you.
Thanks,
see
everyone.
you soon.